Hi, my name's Steve. I'm an alcoholic. Since I started coming to this meeting, I hear people say all the time to always say yes to an ask from AA, and I was like fucking allergic to that idea before I started coming to this meeting, and now I remember why. So, like, if I'm just was sitting over there thinking as I was hearing the first two speak, and I appreciate Matt and Pat, and but I was like, God, if I was a newcomer, I would have lost my fucking mind 3 minutes into this, because definitely didn't come here because of an interest in the concepts or the traditions, you know. And I came in here because shit was bad, and I was a mess, and I could barely sit still, and so I think just going back to the very beginning, I was a really lucky kid. I was born with a lot of privilege. I was the youngest of three boys, growing up in Billings, Montana. My parents were decent, nice people. I heard stories like later in my life that at some point my mom told my dad to take it easy on drinking, and then he did. So that wasn't something I could relate to, and it was nothing I ever saw. I never saw my parents shitty or anything, and but when I was 8 years old, so the way that my brothers worked was like my oldest brother was 9 years older than me, and he was a pretty bad kid. And then my next brother was 5 years older than me, and he was a very bad kid. And then I was a nightmare. But my oldest brother had to find his way into drugs and alcohol, and then he exposed the middle brother a little bit younger than he was, and then the two of them exposed me really young. And the way they did was like they would have parties, and my parents would sometimes go out of town or whatever, and they would have parties, and so I'd wake up, so they'd put me to bed early, and then sometimes I'd wake up and I'd hear kids in the house carrying on and stuff, and up until about 8 years old, life was good, and I was really good friends with my mom and my dad, and I thought my brothers were heroes, and I was a really sensitive and excitable and sweet, by all accounts, kid. I liked superheroes, and I loved making people laugh, and I had a big imagination. And my parents left town. My brothers threw a party, and they put me to bed, and at some point I woke up and I went out to see what was going on, and I couldn't find my brothers, and there was a group of inebriated high school girls, and they cornered me in a part of the house, and they attacked me, and they held me down in front of a group of high school kids, and they put me through a pretty brutal episode of child abuse. And the reason I share that is because there's a lot of trauma in a room full of addicts and alcoholics, and those secrets kept me sick for a long time. And my story doesn't have a lot of power over me. It's got a lot of power, I think, sometimes, but it doesn't have much over me anymore. But I didn't remember that story for 20 years, and I was in treatment, and it came back to me as a nightmare. And when my brother came, I asked him if I was making that up, or he had any recollection of something like that happening to me. And he looked like he'd seen a ghost, and he said that he was about a block away stealing liquor from a neighbor's house, and he heard screaming, and when he came outside, I was running down the street, and alone and very scared, and he scooped me up and never spoke of it again until treatment. So what happened at that point was my parents came home the next day, and they found an entirely different kid. My first addiction, I think, was rage. Like, I learned in that moment that the world is terrifying and you can't trust people. And so I put everybody out there. But I was this really sensitive kid, so I thought this idea of, like, I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to hurt you back, whether it's with my language or with fighting or with just whatever. I'm going to hurt you before you get the chance to hurt me. But I was still this really sensitive kid, so immediately this cognitive dissonance started. It was like, I'm this really violent kid, but I just wanted somebody to like me and love me. So when I would act that way, I'd immediately be racked with shame. And I was too young to have drugs and alcohol at that point, so I didn't know how to make it feel better. So I just always felt really ramped up and shitty all the time. And I remember one time in fourth grade, I think, I got sick, and I missed the day of school. My mom would always come home with movies and strawberry milkshake from McDonald's when I was sick. And so, I was like, well, if I'm sick again tomorrow, I'll get that again. So that happened again. And then, the third day, the anxiety started to creep in. I started to wonder what everybody at school must be thinking about me and stuff. And I got really anxious, and I wanted to avoid that feeling or that embarrassment or whatever it was. I was just demons in my head. So I started to pretend that I was sick, even though I'd gotten better. And and I would stay up at night. I could hear my parents walk down the hall, and they'd listen at my bedroom door, and I'd stay up all night, fake coughing, so that they would think, oh, he's really sick. He coughs in his sleep. He's really sick. And I'd go to the doctor, and I'd cough, and they started taking me to these appointments. And after about 4 weeks, something like that, like a crazy amount of time, this doctor had a moment where they said, is there something else going on? Something happened. And I lied, and I said, no, I'm just sick. And I think about that moment a lot. Like, if I had said, I'm terrified, could somebody have done something different? But I didn't. And that was my story. It was like I was terrified all the fucking time. And these girls that had been part of this abuse continued to date my brother and his friends for years. So they would come over, and I'd relive it. I think in my nervous system, I'd just feel terrified with these people around me all the time. And they started to give me alcohol, and something happened when you put alcohol in me right away. I black out faster than anybody, but you can't tell. I'm blacked out 6 beers in, but I'll go for the next 2 days walking around seemingly kind of normal looking. And in a blackout, the way I work is I like fighting. That fear just runs wild, and so as a little boy, I started getting into fights with these kids that were a lot older and bigger than me and stuff, and it was funny. I mean, they just push me down and stuff, but I was wild, and this reputation sort of started to happen. And that reputation went on for a pretty long time. I got arrested a lot. I remember this guy in this first treatment center I went to. He said, clearly you're an alcoholic. And I was like, how the fuck do you think I'm an alcoholic? And he said, well, you continue to drink in the face of negative consequences. And I was like, name one negative consequence. And he was like, you've been arrested. And I was like, every time I get arrested, I get a new girlfriend. And he was like, what? And he said, well, you're building a record. And I said, but you said my record goes away when I'm 18. Like, we can get all this expunged, right? And he was like, well, I guess. And I was like, well, then. And he was like, your level of criminal thinking is astounding. And I was like, fuck yeah. Like, I thought that was like the coolest thing anybody had ever said to me. I was like, this guy gets me. And I remember like being in the back of a patrol car on a Friday night, and like a carload of my friends pulled up next to this cop car, and I was like so stoked that they got to see it. I was like, this is definitely going to get me late. Like, I thought it was I don't know what. And my older brothers had kind of gone to college and stuff, and it just kept getting worse and worse. I was getting ordered to anger management classes. I was getting ordered to outpatient treatment programs, and I ran away from a residential program and slept behind this Taco Bell for a while. Stole a kid's birthday cake to live off of for a minute, and like it was wild. And I remember finding out years later that my mom used to, if my dad was out of town, my mom would, when she went to bed, she would push her dresser drawers over in front of the door so that I couldn't come in at night and yell at her when I was fucked up. So I was a rough kid. I was a hellion, and I came down here to the University of Utah, Harvard on the Hill, and they let me in on this like totally crazy conditional acceptance. I had to do so many things. They were like, your grades are so. I don't know why they let me in. I think it's just that I had to do so many classes extra. Same thing happened here. Like, I remember getting in trouble and ending up in the president of the university's office called me and was like, get to the dean of students office right now. My dad was like, do you have any idea how many people go to the University of Utah and the president of the university never hears their name? And or the dean of students. And I was like a regular in his office because I was getting into so much trouble here. And it kept on going. Then I got out of school, and I got diagnosed at one point with juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and friends were they'd find me face down and passed out, and they'd have to revive me. They'd have pour orange juice down my throat, different stuff like that, and that didn't faze me. That didn't stop me at all. I can't even tell you how many like deaths and all of this other stuff, DUIs and car crashes with people and suicides along the way. By the time I was 22, I'd had 18 friends commit suicide or overdose, and that was like people who I like, 1 degree of separation. I don't know how many others. And anyway, somehow I just kept just being lucky and having some stupid privilege. I kept advancing in my life, and I thought I found this cocktail that worked. And I had like a special cocktail of drugs and alcohol that I would use. I had a time thing. I would sit there and I would turn the TV on, and while Dr. Phil was on in the background, it meant I could drink beer. And when Oprah came on, I could switch to cocktails, and then after Oprah, I could call my dealer. And that was like a daily ritual in the background, and I timed my life by just trying to convince myself that I had it under control. And then I quit wearing shoes, or I would only wear flip-flops out because I found it was really hard to fight or run from cops in flip-flops. And I started wearing like Hawaiian shirts, trying to make myself like be friendlier. And I found that like people were less likely to punch me in the face if I had on glasses and a Hawaiian shirt. And this kind of stuff like went on and on and on. And then I started having these like I had to take a job where I worked for this industrial bank, and I had lied about finishing my degree, and this anxiety was just always there, and just picking at me all the time. And everybody I worked with either was LDS and didn't drink or do drugs or anything, or I had started doing drugs with them or slept with them. And I was in this office where like there were so many lies happening and so much chaos going on, and I could just never settle down. And my boss called me into his office one time. My anxiety was so high, I made a deal with him. Every time you call me into your office, you have to do this or that. This means I'm okay. This means I'm going to get fired. And because the anxiety, the walk to his office of just wondering, like, fuck, what am I going to get busted for? And he was like, I'll do it, but what are you doing that you think you're going to get fired for? And I was like, nothing. And at the end, people would walk by my cubicle and they would say, do you still, like, what is wrong with you? Do you still have that sinus infection or something like that? And I'd be like, no, there's a bunch of blow in my drawer and I keep doing it. And they'd be like, you're so crazy. And they'd just walk off, and I'd be like, fuck, would somebody just bust me? And my boss would say, why are you late? And I'd say, I took Traxxas this morning, and I was having a cocktail on the way, and I got in a fight with a punker kid, and so I missed my stop, and I had to come back around, and I'm pretty drunk. And he'd be like, you tell the best stories. No one would believe me, and I was trying so hard to get caught. And finally, there was this moment where this woman had told my girlfriend in the office that I was having a relationship with somebody else in the office, and I confronted her in the lunchroom. And the boss came to me later in the day and he said, "Did you yell at so and so in the break room?" And I said, "I don't know." And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, honestly, I can't tell you that I didn't. And he was like, "What? What does that mean?" And I was like, I don't know. And I walked out of his office, and then I started hitting it with my friends, and I realized I'm so fucking far gone. Like, even if I wanted to lie about this, I have no idea if I did that or I didn't do it. And nobody believes me about anything at this point in my life at all anymore. And I was sitting with these three guys at Lumpy's here in town, and I said, I think I got to go to rehab. And this guy was like, shots! And we did the shots, and I was like, I really think I got to go to rehab. And he was like, no, let's do another round. So we did, and then I was like, I'm pretty sure. And he was like, tell you what, we're going to get a hotel room in Park City. We'll call the dealer. We're going to get super fucked up, and we'll do so much bad shit this weekend that by Monday you won't even be worried about what you did on Friday. And I was like, I hate you guys. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I can't stand. The only reason I'm friends with you guys is because you let me continue to behave this way. And I hate you. I don't like me, and I don't like you guys. And they were like, what the fuck, dude? And I was like, I got to go to rehab. And I called my brother, and I went to my condo, and I was sitting there, and I was drinking a bottle of vodka and chewing something or other, and my brother walked in, and he stood in the doorway, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, we've been waiting for you to call. And I called him because he was the one that wouldn't judge me, and I knew he wouldn't judge me, and we sat there, and we drank a bottle of vodka and chewed tobacco, and we talked about how this had run its course. There was nothing left to do. And I'd done the drugs, and I'd smoked the cigarettes, and I had gotten in the fights, and I had done this, and I'd done that. And it just was time to be done. And I went to treatment, and I was really lucky. I went to a ridiculous, over-the-top treatment center. They gave me a makeover. which was super important. Like, it was so ridiculous. I was like, I haven't felt pretty in years. But they gave me a makeover. They gave me a helicopter ride. They let us play with horses, like all of this stuff. But they fucking took us to AA. And they made us do the first 3 steps, and you couldn't leave until you had a sponsor. If you didn't have a sponsor, that's what they said. I mean, you could leave whenever you wanted, but and so I did those things, and I did everything that they told me to do. I mean, I really did. I remember I didn't hook up with anybody in treatment. But the girl I was interested in, she and I had a very serious conversation about the day after treatment, that it was going to be a good time. And when I got out of treatment, I immediately got into a relationship with her, and unbeknownst to me, several other guys from the treatment center. And I kept like pushing the boundaries of the suffering I could take in early recovery. And this person was just kind of walking. I was encouraging this person to walk all over me, like the abuse that I was putting up with. And I remember my sponsor grabbed me at one point and he said, "Why'd you get sober?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Why'd you get sober? Did you get sober to get laid?" And I said, "No." He said, "To be popular?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." He said, "Why did you get sober?" And I said, "I was dying. I got sober to save my life." And he said, "Then why don't you fucking start acting like it?" And I love that, and I'm so grateful to this day for that moment, because it gave me permission to treat things that might seem small to other people like they're a threat to my life. Because the insanity returns way before I drink. I'm starting to do little tiny things along the way that build resentments, that create distance between me and my friends and me and the program that I'm not even aware of. And other things are at work to do the same thing. And I've got to pay attention to that stuff. And when I see it, I've got to react accordingly. I've got to go, I got to extra up on my meetings, on my contact with my sponsor, like all of those things. And it goes back to that moment of like, this is life and death. And this guy that I respected gave me permission to treat it that way. So I started to. I might have screwed around. Like, and I don't really believe in the relationships thing. I don't know how we learn how to relate to other people by being afraid of other people. But I do think, for myself, messing around in the rooms, I never want to need a meeting and like poke my head in a meeting and be like, "Oh shit, I can't go in that meeting," because of something as silly as the way I behave in relationships sometimes. So I got to work. I've done 90 and 90 several times throughout my sobriety. I've done the steps a handful of times. I've always had a sponsor in one form or another. The craziest thing, and I talk about this sometimes, that my life from like 8 years old to 28 was like I was trying to see how much chaos, how much pain, how much suffering. And I was finding out that I had no bottom and I could just keep going like that. And then one day I quit putting alcohol and drugs in my system, and this started to happen. And the closer I am to the program, the more I can see that. I went back to school and I finished a degree I lied about. I got another degree, and then I got a master's degree in the first 5 years of sobriety. And I clearly had switched addictions. I didn't learn much about myself. I didn't learn much outside of working the steps on myself. I didn't learn anything about how to behave like a gentleman or a sober gentleman in a relationship, because I was so into doing that stuff. So I had to learn that stuff later on, and I'm still working on it. But the promises started to come true. I started to have these like really neat moments in my life, and something I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. Most everything I've done in sobriety has been at the suggestion of another person. I had great designs and ideas about. I remember my sponsor at the time was holding the ring before I proposed to my future ex-wife, and I handed it to him, and he was like, "You sure about this?" And I was like, "Trust me." And he was like, "Are you fucking sure?" And I thought, what a dick thing to say right before. The guy was so spot on. I was like, and so every time the idea I had for myself was like, I'm going to marry her. She's going to have a great career. I'm going to smoke cigarettes outside of a treatment center. No offense if anybody who does that professionally. But like, that was it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to meetings and just smoke cigarettes and be like, we are fucking so on the edge. I don't know. And I sell myself short at every turn. And people in my life who knew better started to say things like, you should get your master's. And I was like, I'm too old for that. And they go, no. You should get your master's. And then they told me you should get into meditation, you should get into yoga and stuff like that, and it just kept opening these doors to my life. And I promised John I'd keep it under 90 minutes, so I'll check here. So 7 years ago, I had this little girl came into my life, and she's never seen me smoke. She's never seen me drunk. I've been present for every moment of her life. And when the pandemic happened, I had this little business that had been struggling, and the government came in and said, we're gonna keep you afloat, and you can go home and you don't even have to worry about it that much. We're gonna keep you afloat. And I was like, all right. And then my business kept going because it all switched to online, and then it started to grow. And I got to stay home with this little girl and my partner, and God was working in my life. Disney Plus came out. So my daughter, I raised at the time she was like 4, and I raised her on Marvel movies and like The Walking Dead. And just this rowdy little girl that loves to fight and BMX. And we had this nice little house, and we got to spend a lot of time outside. And instead of sending her to kindergarten, I got to keep her for another year. And we just got to play, and we got to know each other, and it was really, really good. And then when the pandemic, but I didn't like online meetings. I decided I didn't go to one, but I just decided I didn't like them. So I never went to them, and my business kept going. My daughter and I were growing super close, and everything was fine, and I wasn't getting sick or anything, and so I thought I was crushing it. I really thought I was crushing it. And when the pandemic sort of ended, the first time it sort of ended, when I went back to work and invited other people back, my business had grown. And all of a sudden I was like in charge of a bunch of people. And I hadn't been to a meeting in a couple of years. And I started fucking with my life. That insanity started to creep in. I started to make drama. And there was already plenty of drama in my house. But my partner and I had been struggling, but I started to fuck with stuff. And it got out of hand, and I found myself in more pain than I could have imagined I would be at about 15 years sober. And I called a friend and I said, man, I'm just thinking about, I'm just like hurting so bad. I'm in so much, just in a ton of pain. And he was like, oh, fuck, I fucked my life up too. And I was like, really? And we were like, it was like this great bonding moment of like how miserable we both were. And we didn't spend a lot of time on that. We laughed about it, and then we were like, okay, we got to do some shit to get out of this. And I started to try, and I remember I started going back to meetings. I was back at this meeting, this guy he asked this question: are you spiritually fit, or are things just going your way? And when I heard that, I knew, like, man, I'd been in this, like, the pandemic had worked for me. I didn't have to be around people. I kept making money, this and that. And, like, it looked like I was thriving in every area but my recovery. And because shit was going my way, I thought, I can just take it easy. And it created this insane period of time in my recovery. So what I did at that point, again, was I started doing 90 and 90. I started doing finding more ways to be of service, and I got a new sponsor, and I went back to the program. I went through one of the loneliest and most difficult, heartbreaking summers of my life at 16, 15 years sober. And I surrounded myself with friends in the program and loaded up my car, just one car, with six grown men. And we drove to Montana and we floated this crazy river together. And I don't know if they'll ever know how much that saved my ass, just having that experience of just watching Eric almost drown. Brought me such joy. I knew there was hope. But man, I started to make these friends. And the thing I realized that I'd lost was somewhere along the way during COVID, I had lost sight of what my life was about. And the thing that I think is so amazing about Alcoholics Anonymous was this program has given me something to say what my life's about. My life's not about not drinking at all. My life's about being a daddy. It's about being part of my community. It's about being a friend. It's about being a sponsor, about being a sponsee. I have no shortage of shit to do today that makes alcohol or drugs so far down on my list of things I want to do today that it's astounding. And the idea that this has come, I thought this program, when they said, are you willing to go to any lengths to get it? I seriously thought they were going to make me like wash the sponsor's car and go jogging. And the thing I learned was like, go to any lengths is make new friends, go to some barbecues, do the steps, call your sponsor, talk to sponsees, but really get back into life. And getting back into life has made all the difference. And I would do this program and make this shift in my life again any day of the week. It's been such an incredible joy for a little bit of money here and there, and time with friends. I think the last thing that I would say is in the hardest times of my life have been in sobriety. I walked my mom through cancer into death, and got to show up for her. And I went through my partner struggling with postpartum depression, being a dad, like being a small business owner, like all of these things have been challenging in their own way. And every single one of those struggles has handed me a joy and a gift that I never knew was possible. From losing my mom, I learned what it meant to really be alive, and I rebuilt a friendship with my father. my partner and I have learned and taught each other more about struggle and about what loyalty means than I could have ever learned any other way. And my daughter has shown me that this time is so limited, and Alcoholics Anonymous for me has been the easier, softer way. There has been so much love, and it has shown me how to be a gentle and loving person in a way that I never could have imagined I would learn from the maniacs that are in these rooms. And I couldn't have heard it from a saint. I needed to hear it from the saved. And that's who we are, and that's pretty powerful to me. So thank you all for asking me. Thanks a lot, Brandon, for asking me to do this. And I'll take another 24. Thanks.